Stories are a wonderful way for us to gain understanding and perspective. So today I wanted to take a few minutes to give you the background of myself and my former husband, Jeff. Understanding his cancer journey, our cancer journey, and what led to his death will help you understand why I share what I share with you. And hopefully it'll help you and I connect even better. My husband had gone through a period of feeling like he just wasn't himself. He didn't have the energy. He didn't have the stamina. Things were becoming difficult. He went through a lot of testing and they thought lots of different things, but none of it was coming true. None of it was the diagnosis that would give them an answer to help him feel like himself. Then one day he was at his chiropractor and the chiropractor says, "What's this?" And he said, "What's what?" That led him to the doctor for a CT. That led us to the diagnosis, eventually, of sarcoma. Sarcomas are not well understood forms of cancer. We knew that with the advice of the oncologist, we needed to see someone who this was their specialty. We immediately placed several calls and were very quickly connected with a specialist at MD Anderson in Houston. We were blessed to get in within 2 weeks. We flew out, not knowing how soon we'd be home, what to expect while we were there, how much to pack. We just knew we were going. Flight booked, hotel room saved, we left. Testing completed. We were sent home to await the final results, for those results to be presented to the cancer board and a plan of treatment to be put into place. I can say that was one of the longest waits in my entire life. When the call finally came, Jeff had been throwing himself as fully as he could back into his work, I'm sure with a nagging feeling of what was the diagnosis going to be, and specifically, what was this sarcoma that he was dealing with. We ended up finding out that he would need chemo, radiation, and surgery to address it. Our decision was to go to MD Anderson to start the chemo, as it was a very specialized form of chemo. Make sure he was tolerating it well, since that was one of their biggest concerns, before we transferred that treatment back to our home community. Jeff's chemo was very, very rigorous. Day one, we went in and you have no control over the time of the treatment, the length of time it takes, any of that. And they sort of tell you a window, but it's never quite what it is. So we go to the hospital, we go back to the apartment that we'd rented for this treatment period, and go in the next day for the next part of the treatment. And it was like he powered down, like watching a computer just power down as the chemo went in. I felt like I lost the person I had known without losing them physically. It reminded me a lot of my work in senior living communities with people with dementia, when the family would talk about they're there, but they're not. And that's kind of what it felt like. He could answer simple questions, but his interactions, his ability to be part of a conversation, that went away. And that was very, very hard. I felt very alone in this community, very isolated, very much at the call. Plus, I'm sleeping with this chemo pump next between us in bed that I had to change batteries. I have to do all these things and be ready to deal with. It was frightening beyond belief. I mean, I had a hazmat suit to deal with any spills, any vomit. I'm kidding you not. That's how intense the chemo was. Jeff had some issues with the treatment, so we elected to stay in place and for him to continue the second round as they wanted to tweak the dosage. So I was able to extend our apartment rental, and we stayed. We were able to then, after that second round, do testing, see that it was having some effect on it, and go home and resume treatments. It was very similar in our small rural community, going to the oncologist and having the treatment. And we did another couple cycles there. We'd go back to Houston to see how things were going and go home. We did, I believe it was 3 complete cycles of chemo. Came home understanding that it had been somewhat effective against the sarcoma. We're told that he needed to recover, and then we would need to go back for multiple, I think it was 60 days or 60 radiation treatments in a few months. So back to Houston we go for this series of radiation treatments to the sarcoma. It was not as grueling as the chemo, but it still would tire him. It still was something that the schedule was not totally within our control, but he was able to enjoy a little bit of life and be part of things and interact with me a little bit more. We went home, recovered, went back and stayed at the hotel because it was just a testing time to see if the radiation had been as effective as we'd hoped, and it had. We saw the surgeons, we did all kinds of pre-op visits, and set everything in place to come back and do the surgery. Yet another apartment arranged. We went back for the surgery visit. We knew it would be a long process. I understood a lot of what to expect. What they removed was a cantaloupe-sized mass from his leg. So if you can picture that. And it had been crushing, and they had to remove the muscle. They had to scrape the nerve because the sarcoma had encased in the nerve, and they wanted to leave him with a functional leg. They moved muscle that was also redundant to help fill the gap. They did plastic surgery. It was a very long day of surgery. Jeff remained in the hospital. We did some physical therapy there. They sent us back to the apartment to be monitored. I had the standard sort of, post-op care that I had to give to the wound and deal with the drains and all those kind of things. Nothing big in of itself. Eventually, we were discharged from treatment there and were able to drive back home. Didn't want to fly as we had so much stuff. Drove back home and got him home with all the drains and all the treatments. I had to be sure he wasn't sitting up, so he had to recline, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it was a process, but I was very thankful for it. We were very blessed at the time. I had a neighbor who was a nurse, and she was there to offer me reassurance when I couldn't easily reach medical staff at our local hospital, our local oncologist. To give me better verbiage when I did need to call things in and ask questions. He gained strength. His hair was growing back well. They sent us back. I had all kinds of experiences with those drains. But long story really short, I found I could do a whole lot more in this journey than I ever thought I could. So we're back in Houston, and we are told that, okay, everything seems good. We're going to start monitoring you, doing scans on a regular basis just to make sure that there's no metastasis. There was a point where we found out there was metastasis. Yeah, not good. I'm not sure what his response was. He still believed that we were going to keep this sarcoma out of our lives and it wasn't going to impact us, but back on chemo we go. But this was a lighter form of chemo, and so we started it back in our home community. We'd go back, we'd be on the treatment of a certain length of time. It'd be agreed that, hey, it seems to have responded. There's no new metastases. Go home. We go back, and there'd be yet more growth. Jeff continued to teach and enjoy life while being off and on the chemo. Yes, we had to do a lot of adjusting to schedules, but we made it work, and it was wonderful. It was wonderful for almost 6 years. But then he started not feeling well, and we couldn't exactly figure out what it was, but our local oncologist was wonderful, did some lab tests, and we ended up finding he developed a particular form of leukemia, most likely caused by the initial treatment for the sarcoma, the one that had given him control initially that was so hard on his body. Honestly, he totally believed that even though they told him they couldn't aggressively treat this form of leukemia because of his metastatic sarcoma, that it still was not life-limiting. But each day I saw him weaker. Each day I saw him struggling, and the new treatments to deal with just the leukemia were having an impact on his ability to teach. We made the difficult decision for him to end his tenure at the end of the semester, for us to sell the house and to move closer to his family. Moving while someone is dealing with not one but two aggressive forms of cancer that can both end their life is difficult. Most of that fell on me, and he remained convinced he was going to get through this. I was feeling like we were on a very different path, and that for me, healing and wholeness was something different than it was for him. Yet, because he held out so much hope, I kept that hope alive also. While we had gone back initially to MD Anderson for verification of his form of leukemia and the treatment, we ended up transferring the treatment and care here to our current community when we moved. We were able to make sure that we could enjoy and host our daughter's wedding. We had some good days. Eventually, though, the toll on his body of the two cancers, the toll of the treatments, there was no quality of life. There was very little eating or drinking that was happening, and it became very evident he couldn't sustain life, so we had to make the call for hospice. Jeff passed away as he wanted, here at our house under hospice care. I think I can honestly say that he still fought for every breath and every moment of life. I will forever miss him, as will most people that knew him as a friend, a family member, or as a teacher or colleague. But that's only part of the story. And in our next episode, I'll share with you how I have dealt with the grief both during his cancer journeys and since his death.